On social media and in my general network, I noticed an uptick in people looking for work. This is really where the idea for this series originated. My purpose with this series is to get people more exposure by giving them a platform to share their ideas and stories, maybe provide motivation to others, and really hopefully learn a few new job search ideas. My ultimate goal is creating a community where people can inform, share, and possibly be edutained. Today, I'm with Danille Haxton, and I'm excited about this show due to the insights that she might be able to share as a connector of people, processes, and pipelines. And what I'm excited about is her passion for being a people connector. I've heard that in the pre-interview. Danielle, let's dive in. First, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Chris. This is a lot of fun. It's been fun getting to know you. So, a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Danille Haxton. I am born and raised in Colorado. I've been pretty much all over the state. I lived in Texas for a couple of years and ultimately moved back. Currently living in Fort Collins, Colorado. Fantastic city, home of the CSU Rams. It's a great little town. And a little bit about my background is, I think, the three major industries that I've been in since the beginning. It's restaurant and hospitality. I remember waiting tables when I was 14, 15 years old. We all got to start somewhere. And then after I moved through that process, I went into healthcare around 2020, right when COVID hit or right before COVID hit. And then I stayed with a not-for-profit healthcare organization called MGMA for about 3 years and moved up the ranks kind of through that business. And that was a lot of fun. Eventually, I decided to take a little bit of a lateral step and went into SaaS and specifically in live e-commerce technology with a company called Tixer. Unfortunately, for probably about the last year and a half to 2 years, layoffs have kind of affected me quite a bit. So I was laid off of Tixer. They scaled really quickly as an organization and they hired very quickly. And I think they realized after about 2 quarters that their choice to scale the way they did with the teams that they did wasn't going to necessarily fit in with their goals towards the end of the year. So they let a bunch of us go. I then panicked because I'd never been laid off before, and I went ahead and went back to my roots. I started managing a sports bar in Fort Collins, Colorado. Anybody who knows Fort Collins, we are not lacking in choices for food or breweries, so it's very hard to stay competitive in this market here. Eventually, we sat down with the owners and we looked at numbers and decided that this restaurant was not doing well. So January of 2025 was another layoff for me. But, my key background is sales support, sales operations, sales enablement. That's been something that I've always been passionate about. I like making sure that any team that I'm on, the geniuses who sell have the tools they need to be geniuses, because in all reality, those boots on the ground are the people who help keep the parts of the business running. It keeps revenue coming in. And as part of a sales operations team member, I also sat cross-departmentally with a lot of different departments, depending on kind of what was necessary, but to make sure that the sales team was also providing the resources that other departments like marketing or accounting or anybody else needed so that the business could run smoothly.
I've always believed everybody should have a short stint as a waiter for two things. I think it teaches you customer service skills. I'm assuming it would because I've never done it. Customer service skills. And then the second thing is it might teach you what you don't want to do.
I completely agree. I think that everybody should be in the service industry in one form or another at one point in their life. One, because of customer service, but two, it also gives you a perspective, a completely different perspective on how those people work and how those businesses run. And it helps you not take for granted going out to eat or going out to a bar or watching sports or doing something and being able to, again, being a connector of people. Empathy is a really, really big part of my morals and values, and just greeting everybody with grace and treating everybody with kindness. And I think being in the industry helps with that a lot.
You mentioned sales enablement. What exactly does that mean? What did you do in sales enablement?
Sales enablement, I'd say, is a relatively new area of sales that's kind of been coined in the last, I'd say, probably like 5 to 10 years. It may have been called something else different prior to this, but sales enablement is, for what I did in the past, is again making sure that our sales teams had the pitch decks that they needed, that their pipelines were clean, that there is a very clear and linear line from who the business is, what they represent, what the person is selling, and then giving them the tools to be able to sell it to the best of their ability. Another lens on sales enablement might be kind of education on the product. So I know that there's a lot of sales enablement teams that will be more of a post-sales cycle interaction. But the sales enablement team that I had worked on, both at MGMA, as I kind of took it on myself because we needed it for the team that I was running, and then also at Tixer, we looked to see where our holes were and where our bottlenecks were in our sales pipelines to see what we needed to do to try and get those contracts over the finish line. And so that's kind of what sales enablement was in charge of.
It's easy to hire salespeople because everybody needs to sell more. But the problem is if they don't know your business or what they're selling, then that takes them a lot longer to get up to speed. So maybe sales enablement, based on what you said, it helps them sell more or sell better or both. And everybody needs better salespeople.
And salespeople are good at selling, right? They're good at people. They're good at understanding how they need to move their sales process along. And they have that, again, I talk about that genius of being able to close a sale. I think everybody could always use help and everybody could always use tools. So yeah, sales operations, sales enablement, ops is more on the tech side. And then sales enablement is definitely more on the almost marketing side.
I see roles for sales enablement posted frequently on the job boards. So that tells me that it's either new or it's popular.
I think it's important. I think it's very important. And if you have a marketing or a graphic design background, sales enablement is a very cool segue if you want to sit in between both a marketing role and a sales role, in my personal opinion.
So you had mentioned being out of work I mean, you didn't say how long, but you were laid off. That's got to be stressful mentally.
Very. So the first layoff was November of 2023. That was with Tixer. And again, I had never experienced that before in my professional life. And at that point, I want to say I'd been working in more corporate or white collar roles since at least 2017, 2018. And again, had never experiencing that. I took about a month to find a new role, and so went into and started to run a sports bar in Fort Collins and ran that for a year. Honestly, hit a lot of walls at that restaurant. One, because Fort Collins is anywhere between a 7 or 9 per capita in restaurants in the city itself. That's not even the county, or it's the surrounding cities. It's very, very dense. And we just kept hitting walls over and over every single time we went. And so after about a year, it was right before Super Bowl, me and the owner and the other managers were looking at our numbers, and we were looking at projections, and we just said, there's no way this is sustainable. So we made the executive decision to just shut it down, because this owner had, or still has, 3 other restaurants, but they're up in the mountains. So he wasn't able to be as present as I think he wanted to be, because he had 3 other restaurants to run on top of ours. So a little bit of the black sheep of the restaurant family with him, unfortunately. And it was a really good idea, but I think there was a lot more that could have been done well in order for that place to succeed. So another layoff. So, and yeah, I have been unemployed as of January of 2025.
Do you think this is a more challenging job market? I mean, you've been unemployed before. You said you took a month off before you found another job. It's obviously been longer than a month this time. What do you think's happening? Is the job market more difficult now? And if yes, then what do you think's happening?
Oh, it is very difficult now. I'm a mid-level employee, right? I'm not necessarily at a VP, director, or senior level executive role, at least at this point in my career. And finding those coordinator or manager roles, kind of those mid-level to entry-level positions, was never an issue. I think that there are multiple things going on in the job market right now. First and foremost, from an economic standpoint, I think there's a lot of companies that aren't 100% sure what's going to happen, both, whether it's in the stock market options, whether it's industry specific. And I think the other portion of that, because companies are getting so revenue, or they're getting so revenue focused and they're getting so overhead focused that they're laying off a bunch of people. So now not only do we have companies who are afraid to spend money, they're trying to grasp onto money in order to make sure their companies stay afloat. And now the candidate pool has, I mean, this is a rough guesstimate, but I'm going to say it's probably quadrupled in a year. There are thousands. I mean, we see stuff all over the news, especially like the federal layoffs that happened a few months ago. I mean, there are thousands of people unemployed in the United States right now. And I also think the system's a little broken. I think we talked a little bit about that when we were doing our pre-interview. Not only are job seekers incredibly because they feel like they can't get traction. On the flip side of that coin, the recruiters and the hiring managers, I have a lot of empathy for them because they are now having to, I mean, just comb through 50 times more applicants than they're used to. And there's so many talented people who are currently sitting in the job market. It's really hard, I think, on both sides for us to try and understand one another. And I think there's a lot of scapegoats that people are choosing to look at. ATS is one of them. Having used applicant tracking systems before, depending on which one you're using, it's really not its fault. There is still a large human element to recruiting. And I think that they are just as overwhelmed and probably a little underappreciated as, people who are laid off right now.
It's interesting you mentioned that about the ATS. My interview I just wrapped up and published. She talks about there is no such thing as AI bots in ATS. Well, there are, but companies don't use it to screen candidates. It's still the person, and that there's no really ATS compliant resume. If you can upload the resume, then it's ATS compliant,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
And I feel like there's enough tools that we as job searchers right now are having used. So for example, my sister-in-law was also laid off about 6 months prior to my most recent layoff. And she finally got a job. She's doing great. But when we were both in the woods with that process and trying to find jobs, we started to look at tools that we could be able to use. So one of them is called Teal AI. And essentially, it's this AI bot that is connected to a majority of the job boards where you can upload your resume and compare it to how accurate is your resume reflecting to the deliverables, the roles and responsibilities of the role that was uploaded onto the job board. Essentially, all it's looking for is keywords. That's probably the best explanation, kind of layman's terms explanation I can give for that bot. But what was funny was I used it a couple of different times after having submitted my resume to over 500 jobs. I could not get traction anywhere. I was being super specific and making sure, if I was applying on LinkedIn, I was one of the first 10 people to apply. And I would do the networking aspect of it. I would see if there was a hiring manager. I would see if I could find somebody on LinkedIn to connect with, or if there was anybody who was currently in my network that sat in that company just to get my foot in the door, because just cold applying was not working anymore. And I used Teal AI to apply to, I think there were 2 separate roles in a company that I was very interested in working with. And I didn't get a word back. So no matter how many times we use these tools, they're really only going to work if the system is running efficiently. And back to the original point, like, I don't think the system is working right now. The job recruiting, the job search system is not what it needs to be in order for people to be successful.
Yeah, back to my previous interview, the lady essentially told me that her opinion is that referrals don't work anymore. It was before you could find somebody within the company, they'd refer you in and you'd have an interview. But she said that's even falling apart at this point. I don't know if I think it's still the best way, but unfortunately, it's not a great way still.
So, and that's my thing. I've had people ask, well, what can we do? And this is part of it. Talking about it and seeing the perspectives from people on each side of the experience right now. I don't know if there is a good fix. It's also out of my wheelhouse. I'm a job seeker right now. Yes, I have hired people in the past and I have worked with those systems, but I don't know what we would do to fix this other than, create more jobs and hopefully have a more stable economy in the future so that we can invest in the people who help this country run and in multiple different industries and multiple different facets.
Yeah, that's something that I've talked with other people about is economic theory is possibly that the market just can't support, maybe as many white collar employees as we have in the market today. That could be part of the challenge. And it may be the first signs of the capitalist system kind of cracking a little bit. I don't know. I don't want to be an alarmist, but that's possible. If you watch futuristic movies, they'll talk about some people just don't have jobs. They just because there's not enough of them. And if you look at Europe, I think they're down to a 4 day work week.
I think the main reason for doing that for me personally is because as a worker, I've become so much more efficient. I don't need to be in an office 5 days a week in order to get done what I need to, but that doesn't apply to everybody. So interesting that Europe's doing that. I didn't realize that they had chosen to do that to potentially try and help from like an economic standpoint. That's really interesting.
That was back in the day, so I haven't studied it recently, but I have
Mm,
heard that they're a bit more socially liberal in terms of their employment philosophy and employment laws. And it's for that reason, even from a productivity standpoint, which is where my background is, supply chain management and productivity. They were not really keen on making things so productive that you had to lay people off. So
mm.
that was just something that they watched out for. So you talked about going through job search. What are some of the things that you do that you think helps you?
I think that something when we originally had our pre-interview and we were talking about it, LinkedIn, of course, felt like the safest job board. And then, of course, come to realize that there was a lot of other job boards that were going to be more beneficial based on the industries that I was looking at. When I was starting on LinkedIn, I'd say for the first 2 months, I was mass applying to jobs. And I'm talking, 15 to 20 jobs a day. I was staying in my niche of sales operations or sales enablement. And after not really getting any traction there, I said, okay, well, where do we need to pivot? Then I started to look and see where some parallel movement from sales operations to another role would be. I started looking at customer success management. I started looking at account management. And it was, we talked about this a little bit too. It's really interesting. And I'm curious to see if anybody else has any feedback on this. But as somebody who works in sales support, I have had so many recruiters reach out to me for sales, B2B and B2B sales in the last 4 or 5 months. It's insane. I was always told that because I have kind of the customer service background, because I've worked with sales team where we're selling services or solutions, not necessarily selling something maybe a lot of people don't need. Why didn't I ever go into sales, direct sales? And it's funny to me because I just didn't necessarily think that's where I wanted to be. And there's a stigma that somewhat follows sales people around, and it has for a long time. Like, for example, I remember the sleazy car salesman, not to dog on anybody, but the sleazy car salesman was such a personality type for a lot of salespeople because salespeople were very pushy. And I never wanted to be viewed in that lens because that was never my goal when I was supporting a sales team. We always had people come to us and try and offer a solution rather than pushing something on somebody that they really didn't need. So when I started to open, like kind of take off my blinders, I started to look at other job boards. I then started to get very specific and I introduced TLAI into my job applications. I set up different notifications to make sure that I was going to be one of the top 10 applicants. I was applying and working on resumes and networking and doing everything for probably about 5 to 6 hours a day. And it's worked in a sense where I've created a lot of new connections, and I hope that casting a wide net of connections will eventually lead me to a really awesome, stable, fantastic role that will help project my career where I want it to be the next 5, 10, 15 years. As of right now, it was mass applying, then it was niche applying. And it's just turned into salespeople reaching out to me to see if I want to do direct sales, either B2B or B2C. So that's been interesting. And I've very seriously considered it because some money is better than no money right now.
You told me before the show started that you have some news.
Yes. So it was funny after we got off our pre-interview call last week, I was on LinkedIn just following up with some direct messages and weeding through the connections. And I had a recruiter reach out to me for a fintech company in Fort Collins. And he and I had a quick 15-minute phone conversation. It went very, very well. I had never really considered fintech as part of a career path for myself, but it makes sense. It's still technically SaaS. It's definitely this specific program, this company is essentially trying to eliminate paper payments because, checks are a little old school. And so, but there's still a lot of small and mid-sized businesses that utilize checks in order to pay vendors or pay bills. Well, what this company is attempting to do is try and eliminate that process, because not only does it save the bank money, it also saves the customer money. Over the weekend, I sat and I thought about it. I reached out to the recruiter on Monday and I said, I think I'm going to give this a shot. And it is a enrollment specialist. So it is cold calling. The leads are already generated for us. And I met with a senior leader on Monday. I was on campus for an hour and a half on Tuesday, and Tuesday night I got a job offer.
And I will tell the audience that we had this interview scheduled before
Yeah.
you got and accepted the offer. So I'm going to take a little bit of credit with helping you find the job. So that's
Do it.
part of the show. I want people that join the show or listen and participate to feel that they can do the same thing.
I think what's been kind of cool about this entire process, and something, you and I had originally kind of chatted about, was the perseverance and the resilience that a lot of people, it's really hard for people to do, especially when, I know people who have been laid off substantially longer than I have, and it gets so tiresome and you are so burnt out because looking for a job is a full-time job. It is not just going and applying to every applying to every single job you see. It's trying to do the networking. You're going to networking events. I went to a handful of networking events in Northern Colorado just to see if I could put a name and a face and be that person who says, yeah, this is what I'm looking for, because you never know who you're going to meet and you don't know the answer if you don't ask. Perseverance and the positivity, it does pay off, even if you have to pivot. And I did. I am going into a sales role that is with a fantastic company. And honestly, I think that's a big reason why I said yes, because this company they have a fantastic background. They have fantastic partners. They treat their employees incredibly well. It is local, but they are technically a national company. They have fantastic, fantastic backing. And who knows? This company's grown so much in a year that maybe I get to grow with it. And I think that was something that I ultimately decided, this isn't a step back. This is another lateral step towards putting more tools in my tool belt so that eventually maybe I can grow with this company. Maybe eventually it will set me up for success for the next step in my career, whatever that may be. But it's also, sales is what you make of it. So if you're in competition with yourself, and I love doing that, if you're in competition with yourself, sales works really, really well.
I can see you smiling, or I can even hear you smiling. It's in your voice. But I think you have that type of personality. You're going to be successful at whatever you do. And sales, combine that with sales enablement, I think you're going to be able to knock it out of the park. So congratulations there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it. I'm also very thankful that it's less than a 10-minute drive.
Oh, you have to go to the office?
Yeah, I do. And it's okay. I've always worked remote or always worked hybrid, minus maybe 2 jobs in my entire career path. I think it'll be really interesting to be back into an office and not also have to commute over 45 minutes to an hour each way in order to get to an office.